Okay, so good morning, everyone. Today is Wednesday, July 15th, 2020. The time is 9:03 a.m. This is a special meeting of our elected officials. I am officially calling this meeting to order. Attending in person, Commissioners Duncan and Fillios. Joining us by phone is Commissioner Bill Brooks. Do we have any changes to the agenda? Hearing none. Moving on to our first item of business, COVID-19 testing, a general discussion. Who wishes to lead us?
Ms. Berry.
And by the way, folks, when you speak, you have to get to a mic. It's important that we're able to pick you up for our YouTube and folks listening in. So, Barry McHugh, take it away, sir.
Good morning, Commissioners. For kind of the general, maybe good of the folks that are working in the county, I just wanted to share an experience because I had an employee test positive. It was just before the 4th of July, and some of the experience that I gained out of that I thought might bear repeating because even when I've shared it with a couple other people in management positions, they had questions too about how do you handle that, and it's a little tricky because there are privacy issues that come up, and then there's also potentially in my office a multiplication factor that if you have an employee who had what they call close contact, which there's a specific definition about that, and then they might have to be tested and they might miss work. I unfortunately, like 2 days after we found out about the positive test, got what I thought was a head cold. Turned out to be a head cold because I ended up having to go get tested myself. But then I had to quarantine for 10 days because the test is not 100% foolproof. So I guess what I'm saying is to think about the kind of downstream impact of a single employee that might test positive could really disrupt an office's operation. We're on the verge of starting to do jury trials again, and it's going to be busy because we've got a backlog of jury trials, and so I can't afford to have 3-4 attorneys out during that time frame, and so we're being more cautious. I'm having people in the office wear masks when they're not in their own workspace, and people who are in the office wear masks because of that concern, and that's based on my experience, and I think everybody runs on a pretty lean budget in the county, and so it's just a sort of a cautionary tale, I guess. And I would certainly be willing to answer questions. I would also ask for the board to give Sylvia a few minutes because I think she's prepared to hand out sort of a go-by for people in the county regarding kind of some of the rules and some of the standards that relate to the COVID thing. So maybe Sylvia can come up, and if anybody has any questions, I can certainly try to answer those.
Okay. Sylvia Proud, our HR Director. Good morning, Sylvia.
Good morning, and I have some handouts.
Go right ahead, Sylvia.
So in relation to COVID, there's a lot of unknowns and questions regarding COVID. So what HR is trying to put together is an evolving guideline, just some things that we can go through and, what do we do if an employee is sick? What do we do if a employee has a potential exposure? And most of the guidance we're going to be giving from an HR perspective is for the employee to contact their primary care physician or Panhandle Health's informational hotline, because there's that, they need to know to what severity have they been exposed to someone who has had COVID, or do they have someone as a family member in there, and they'll navigate them through that process to determine if they need testing or not. So we put some basically frequently asked questions and some general guidelines. Of course, contact HR at any time and we'll assist in navigating this process, and we'll ask questions of other entities as well. A lot of reference comes from the CDC in terms of how do you clean an area that you've had an employee who was in the office and then we find out they test positive for COVID. We need to get that area cleaned up. So the CDC provides some guidance related to that. Also within this document, we're addressing wearing of face coverings as an option if social distancing isn't available. One of the things we really wanted to call out in that is that some departments may require masks being worn and some may not. And then it's all on our own responsibility if we want to wear a mask or not. Our telecommuting policy is real timely in terms of if we have an employee who's being tested for COVID and it's a specialty that can work from home, have them work from home if you can. But again, it's at the discretion of the elected official or department head on whether they should be teleworking, even if they get COVID and they get a mild case, and they really are functional and can work, and you guys decide, let's have them telework, you can do that. Back in April, the feds passed the law, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. So we have leave benefits for employees who are either being tested or have COVID, or they're home with someone who has COVID, or daycare issues. So HR is your point of contact and will help you navigate that process. And it's going to be a learn as we go as well, because this is definitely evolving. On this document, if you see something you'd like to have included in it, we'll research it and see if it needs to be added to this, because we really looked at what kind of questions have we gotten, where can we try and help, but we'll update it regularly as needed.
Okay. Any questions for Sylvia? Yes, Steve, Matheson, Treasurer. You want to come up or get to a mic, Steve?
Right there.
No. Is it the handheld?
Yeah.
Yeah, pick it up, please.
I just saw this for the
There you
first
go,
time,
good.
so, excuse me, but is there a definition or a legal difference between quarantine or isolation?
Go ahead,
There
Sylvia.
is, and we could add that to the criteria and get it from CDC. But my understanding is that quarantine is when you don't actually have COVID, but potentially are being tested and they ask you to stay away. Isolation is where you truly have it and they keep you separated. So the diagnosis would be COVID. The preliminary quarantine is for potential, I believe.
Is
But we can get
potential.
more, I could add that definition to the guideline.
And
Okay.
who is describing or who is prescribing the isolation or the quarantine?
That would be the employee's physician, or if they're working with Panhandle Health, they would be making that determination because they know the employee's medical history and their level of contact with someone with COVID.
Okay, and then the written documentation for clearing back to work has to come from one of those two?
It can come from whoever they were diagnosed by. And we've been having some conversation, Barry and I, about that, what is required. What we're finding is we could provide a form, but most doctor's offices are putting it either on their letterhead or a prescription note that says employee is eligible to return to work, that sort of thing. So it could be pretty basic as long as they tell you that employee can come to work, but it comes from their physician or whoever diagnosed them with COVID.
And without that, we deny them access to the building?
That would be an option we can discuss. I'm finding there's a mix of we'll just let them back and then others are taking precautions. The policy, the FFCRA policy that was approved for April 1st did say reach out to HR and we would look at it from a legal perspective of what documentation must be provided.
Okay.
I mean, it's going to be fluid. Some doctors' offices are so busy, we need to be somewhat flexible, but we can require it.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Jen? Yeah, please.
So currently, we have 2 employees being tested, and Barry made a good point about maybe the tests aren't necessarily accurate. How, if someone's being tested and it comes back negative, how long should they stay out, and, you know, does the doctor need to provide a note saying they should be out for 10 days?
And I hate this canned response, but HR is going to guide that we work with the employee works with their physician or their healthcare provider that had ordered the testing for them to determine how long they need to be out, if any. You know, as Barry mentioned, he had to be out 10 days. So they'll determine that, and we don't, because we don't know the circumstance of when they were tested, what their physician's going to require. Some may require 2 negative tests before they come back, but we have to leave that up to the medical professional to determine that.
So we'll be asking our employees to consult with their doctors if they get a negative test, how to proceed forward with coming back to work.
Yes.
Anything further? Yes. Sheriff Wolfinger, please. Come forward, Ben.
Unfortunately, we've had 2 positives in our organization of employees, and we've managed to get through those without a whole lot of difficulty. That's because we've had some good procedures in place, and there's been some question about whether we can mandate those procedures. Darren Murphy from Barry's office sent us a really great link to the EEOC website that's specific to the COVID information. I've sent that to both Barry and Sylvia, and if you wanted to send that out to the other electeds, I think that would be a great help. That answers very specific questions about what can we require as far as, like, can we require a mask? Can we require, you to wear gloves or whatever the case may be? It answers those questions. It talks about onboarding people. Can you have them test after a conditional offer? It talks about returning to work after a positive test. But it answers some very specific questions, and it's very well done, and I think it's a great resource for us.
Okay, thank you for that.
We'll include that on the website
Okay, great.
at KC Place.
Thanks, Sylvia. Any further questions for Sylvia or Barry? In case you're not aware, if you happen to be a blood donor, for the duration of the summer, they include in your donation a free antibody test. And so that's something you might find worthwhile if you happen to be a donor. Other than that, the only other thing I have to add, I was informed last night that there was a COVID-induced death in Hayden, and it was a young man, mid-30s, who, by the way, also happened to be diabetic, was working at the country club, if I'm not mistaken, and collapsed. The EMTs came, they worked on him for, I want to say, might have been even an hour and a half, rushed him to the hospital, but there he expired and he was diagnosed with COVID. So that might have been the catalyst, but yes, there was an underlying condition as well. So, like I said, mid-30s, but anyway, no one's immune, I guess. Other than that, let's move on. Item number 2, COVID team, Eide Bailey's opinion on Governor Little's property tax relief program. This is a discussion, and I should introduce Jill Daugherty from Eide Bailey, our auditor. So Jill, the floor, oh, Jody, forgive me. Jody, I'm sorry. Jody, the floor is yours. Go right ahead. Dena, do you want to come up as well? So you have access to the mic, you and our Jody, and, well, you're both our Jodys, I guess, in a sense, but Michelle, are you coming? Do you want to come forward? Okay. Okay.
Try to keep it succinct.
So, Jody, do you want to lead us, please?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I'm not necessarily going to give an opinion on the program, but Dena asked me to share some of the concerns that we have brought up in our conversations with the governor's office and various other organizations as we've been talking about this. And my point of view is, as an auditor, when I have to come in and audit this award, if you were to have it, is where my concerns are, because the Treasury did decide that these funds are subject to the single audit, which brings them under the uniform guidance. So where I have some concerns, because it's just not very clear right now. The Treasury came out with guidance, which seemed clear, but then they came out with their frequently asked questions, which seemed to muddy the waters a little bit. So the guidance says that for a expenditure to be eligible for this funding, it can't be accounted for in the budget that was in effect as of March of 2020. And it talks about payroll for employees who are substantially dedicated to mitigating the risk and the emergency. And the frequently asked questions came out with an answer that said that you as a government are allowed to presume that the payroll costs for your public safety employees were substantially dedicated to mitigating and responding to COVID. There was another question and answer that was related to the fact that the guidance says it can't be accounted for in the budget as of March 2020. And the answer talks about a function that becomes substantially different in use than what you intended when you set the budget. So with those, with that guidance and with the frequently asked questions, the concern is what payroll really is eligible for reimbursement. Are you allowed to submit all your payroll for your public safety because you're presuming that their work was substantially dedicated to fighting the emergency, responding to the emergency, or do you have to somehow substantiate, prove, keep documentation on that fact? Do you have to be able to show that that their function was substantially different in use than what you intended during when you set your budget for fiscal year 2020? So I will say that there's a lot of people asking these questions, a lot of states asking these questions. It's not just Kootenai County that's wondering the answer. It's not just the state of Idaho. I know that AICPA, which is the organization that most accounting firms are a part of, they are reaching out to Treasury with these and many more specific questions related to this funding. So hopefully we'll get some answers. I guess the other complication is Eide Bailey's guidance on how we would audit these funds probably isn't going to be issued by the OMB until this fall. So we're looking at maybe September at the earliest. So we're all just kind of running blind at the moment. So those are some of my concerns. Dena, I don't know if you wanted to, I can't see the actual meeting, so I don't know if you wanted to add more or if you guys have questions for me.
We have some points, Jody and I have some points.
You have to point the mic.
Yeah, just pull the mic over if you would.
I think I'll hand off to Jody because she's very familiar with the federal guidance and the use of federal funds, so I'll hand the floor to Jody.
I would say that I concur with Eide Bailey in terms of the concern. I would say that also there isn't anything by the OMB that we received that would indicate that that would be permissible. And the state
Jody,
of...
can you pull the mic in closer, please? Go right ahead.
Can you hear me now?
No, absolutely.
Okay. Do I need to start over, or is it okay that I just continue where I
No,
was?
start over. It's brief. Go ahead.
Okay, so I agree with Eide Bailey that I concur that there is concerns regarding the allowance of this particular reimbursement. I would say that there isn't anything from the OMB that indicates that that would be acceptable. Also in the guidance, it does indicate that tax relief is not acceptable. It also says that the payroll must be substantially dedicated to the COVID emergency, and again, that is specific. So I think that there are things that have not been answered. The state of Idaho has indicated that they are pursuing the answers from the U.S. Treasury as well, and they're looking for a workaround, but I don't see one at this particular point in time.
Okay, thank you. Dena, did you want to jump in?
Sure, and I just wanted to briefly touch on the email that I had sent where I just kind of laid things out, and I had copied in our COVID team as well as Jody from Eide, so we're kind of all on the same page. So along with what both Jodys said, the primary guidance from the Treasury is fairly clear, and the FAQs muddy the water. So the state appears to be looking more towards the FAQs. When we put this COVID team together, we wanted to have the best minds in the room with the best expertise. So we have a cross-functional team so that we can be good stewards of this huge amount of money. We know that our area has not been hugely impacted. It has been impacted, but not to a huge dollar amount. So in order to set the table correctly and to be good stewards, we got together very early on, and we set up payroll codes so that we could directly be in compliance with the original Treasury guidance. So we know which employees were dedicated to mitigating COVID above and beyond the budget, because we have overtime codes for those employees. We have those employees' hours and their pay specifically identified in our system. And those hours and that money can be reimbursed by the state and will pass muster with being properly documented. So we feel comfortable that we can comply with the original guidance, and we don't need to, for administrative convenience, say, okay, so we're assuming all payroll for public safety is mitigating COVID. We at the very start said, okay, we know this money is coming. We want all of our experts in the room, and we want to know exactly what we should be doing. So we have been tracking costs, including payroll costs, from the very beginning. We have them in a separate fund. We have special account codes set up for those. So the auditor's office and the COVID team feels comfortable with this tracking mechanism. That said, the total amount of payroll for the county for mitigating COVID above and beyond budgeted expenses unloaded is $30,644.96. That's as of the last payroll. Loaded, that could be approximately $45,000 to $46,000. If we say, well, if we project that out to the end of the year, I would say that the highest we would want to project that out is maybe $80,000, and that might even be high. So that said, and the amount of properties that we have in the county, that's less than $1 per property. So I know that administratively, we don't even know how to tackle this. I would defer to the treasurer to weigh in on that, but given the immateriality of the number, now other organizations may not have tracked as precisely as we have, and they are estimating an entire payroll. But we're in a good position where we don't have to use a workaround. We're following the guidance to the letter. So that's your number. So we humbly submit that we've tracked these numbers as closely as we can for you so that you can make an informed decision.
So a couple things I would add, actually, for the benefit of our attendees and anybody who's participating via YouTube. The term OMB, Office of Management and Budget, and everybody should know that we do have a COVID task force, of which Dena, Darrow, Jody, Beasy are a part, and there are other members as well. The next item on our agenda really ties closely with this one, but before we move on, Jody, Daugherty, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I don't.
Okay, well, thank you. Feel free to hang on, please. We're going to move on to the next item, which is item number 3, a decision on Governor Little's tax relief program, and that's a potential action item, so there could be a vote by the board. And so, Leslie, do you want to start off here?
Actually, I'm hoping that Barry's willing to weigh in on this.
Sure. So Barry McHugh, our prosecutor. Welcome, Barry, again. Thank you, Jody. Thank you both Jodys. Thank you, Dena.
Good morning again. As I think the commissioners are aware, a number of prosecutors from around the state have been kind of talking and comparing notes. I provided a copy of what was sent to me and others yesterday, which is just a go-by letter that was prepared by Latah County Prosecutor Bill Thompson, and it's not something that I can say that they're going to send out verbatim, but it's something that was sent out as a way of saying, here's what we're probably going to do. You'll see that it's very cautious and a number of reservations regarding what the county may do later in time, but it is in effect a placeholder letter saying we don't want to miss the deadline that is set for July 15th, but we may or may not ultimately participate in the program. And I think that there are some significant questions, and I think that the manner in which Dena and Jody have described the way that they are analyzing expenses that are appropriately reimbursed through the program is conservative, but appropriately conservative. In terms of the analysis that was provided by the Attorney General's office, I think it's consistent with that. You can get into the question of if someone was assigned specifically to COVID-related duties, but then that doesn't answer then you can say, okay, we should maybe cut away the salary and benefits for that period of time or that percentage of the work that the person was doing, but that doesn't answer the revenue replacement question, which I think is one of the most significant ones. And I think what Dena and Jody described prevents that question from being an issue. And so I think that that's an appropriate approach. I know the board could do a letter like this, and I know under consideration is whether that's something that the board really thinks is even worth the time and trouble. And I won't speak for Mr. Matheson, but at least I've had a conversation. I know there are logistical issues with regards to him. How do you communicate what the governor's asking for people to communicate? So I'd be happy to answer any questions, but I think you get the gist of where I'm at.
Okay. Bill, any questions for Barry?
No, I don't have any questions for Barry.
Leslie?
Not at this time. Steve, did you want
Yeah.
to weigh in?
Steve, do you want to come share some of your thoughts? I know you have concerns with the potential implementation. So this is Steve Matheson, our treasurer. Go right ahead, Steve.
Yeah, there are a lot of concerns. I guess what I would probably,
I would ask Steve to speak up a little bit.
Yeah, just pull up the mic if you can, Steve.
I'm so tall. that
Or
I
if you
have
want to sit
bend over.
down, you can sit down too.
Sorry.
You
We're in the
guys,
same boat.
yeah.
Never mind.
Anyway, back to the program that the governor's mentioned, and I'm going to follow up on what Barry has said. I think at this present time, there's enough unknowns that his recommendation to have the board kind of basically have a placeholder saying, okay, we're opting in, but we're probably going to opt out afterwards. Because one of the things is we have to anticipate that the Treasury will come out with written guidance. That written guidance will then clarify the issue, which may surprise us all and say, yes, you can use it. It would be a shame to have opted out, have the guidance come into place, and have no mechanism to opt back in. So I think that the actual final destination is likely that the board might choose to opt out, but not at this time.
Do we know what the deadline is?
Well, the deadline's today, I believe. isn't it?
17th.
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 So
to
that's
opt in or
Friday.
out. Right.
Okay.
If you are convinced as a board that you don't want anything to do with this, I understand that, and you could go ahead and opt out at this time. It just restricts your flexibility.
So if we were to opt in, say, by Friday, when is the deadline for opting out?
There is no deadline that I'm aware of.
Okay. Go ahead, Jen, please. So about a month? So for everyone's benefit, that was Jennifer Locke, Chief Deputy Clerk. Thanks, Jen. So we have about a month to ultimately make the decision whether or not to stay in, if we were to opt in. Okay.
Reading between the lines, it seems like maybe that's what some of the other cities that have announced might be doing as well.
Okay.
Those are my only comments unless you have specific questions.
No, I think I'm fine.
Any,
Now, if any of our cities opt in, and they might, what's the challenge presented to you to implement this?
It's significant. I have communicated to the governor's office via a conference call that as of this day, this was about 2 weeks ago, I have no intentions of putting the actual credit on the tax notice. If it goes forward and there is a city within the county of Kootenai that does participate, my proposed step forward will be to include a letter, an insert in the tax notices that basically describes the program and which taxing entities have chosen to participate, and showing the information in aggregate or total on that notice. But I, at this point in time, do not plan on including any detail on the actual tax notices, and that's due to some programming challenges and resources and some other things.
Okay. Questions for Steve?
Nope.
All right. Appreciate it. Thank you, Steve.
So I have a question for Barry now.
Go right ahead.
Are you willing to help us with a similar letter to what L'Etat is presenting if we decide to opt in and then opt out?
Of course, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Bill, any thoughts?
You know, I've been listening very carefully. Thank you. I think we should opt in as long as we have the opportunity to opt out within the next approximately 30 days.
Okay. Dena, Jody, do you want to weigh in here before we take a formal vote? We value your opinion.
I'm told two. I'll come down. I would say that the county has been given over $4 million as the CARES Act. I would say that us spending that money is highly unlikely. I would say that the cost to implement such a thing is greater than what the return would be for the taxpayer, and I think we should be good stewards of the money that we have, and we should be wise. I also think that the way Dena has set it up, you can get the same end result by doing nothing. So, yeah.
All right, thank you.
And
Dena?
that end result would be refunded for overtime used, and that relieves the tax burden on the taxpayer because that money goes into our accounts. So by taking zero, which we're obligated to do under this particular plan, and by being reimbursed and actually keeping the reimbursement, there's less that we need to tax. So either way it works, but this particular method has no conflict and is very clear.
You mean the $4 million?
Well, what we're being reimbursed, what we're actually would be reimbursed if we
okay, I'm
applied for
sorry.
reimbursement of
The dollar
the-
for dollar
yes.
reimbursement,
But
okay.
like Steve said, you know, if the rules change, if the rules were to change, we can reassess that. If they really say that you can look at the entire payroll, then that's a completely different number. But everything that I've read And the OMB and what our auditors are saying is specific employees, specific time spent mitigating COVID.
Understood.
So that's why we proceeded as we did. So
Okay.
it's a hard decision.
Fair enough. Barry, please.
It sounds like, this is Barry McHugh, it sounds like there's another mechanism to receive reimbursement for the same costs that we're talking about. And I guess,
Yes.
could you explain that? I'm not sure I understand where that would come from.
So the CARES Act, the $4 million that is given to Kootenai County is treated like a grant. So we've been tracking expenses that are under the guidance allowable to be reimbursed. So we submit reimbursements with all the backup for those expenses, and then that $4 million is drawn down and refunded to the county. So those overtime costs can be done that way. If we go with the state's plan, we forego that. They reimburse us, and then we turn around and give it to the taxpayers. So we can't be reimbursed for it really, because we're going to give it away.
Yeah,
as
otherwise we'd be
tax.
double dipping in essence.
Right,
Okay.
no double dipping, basically, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dena. Anyone else? No? Okay. Leslie, Bill, thoughts? Bill? You want to reiterate what you said? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I like, the way it sounds to me, if we go ahead and opt in at this point, then we have another approximately 30 days to opt out. And I like having options open instead of closing off by not opting in.
Okay, Leslie?
I agree at this point. Without that written Treasury guideline, and I don't mean the guideline's already been provided, but I understand that specific questions to this program have been asked of the Treasury and not been responded to in writing yet. So absent that, I think it would be beneficial to opt in, and then once that Treasury guideline comes out, then we can decide if it is beneficial to the taxpayer of Kootenai County or if it's detrimental to them. So I do agree with Jody and Dena that the guidelines as they are right now, it's not worth it to opt in. But because we're still waiting for that final guideline from the Treasury, based specifically on this program, then I suggest we opt in with Barry penning a letter similar to what Latah County's presenting.
Yeah, and I would have to agree with both Leslie and Bill. I don't see, I mean, clearly, I think from what both Dena and Jody have indicated, there really, at this time, doesn't appear to be any benefit by opting in. But then by the same token, if it turns out that U.S. Treasury does in fact agree with the state of Idaho, and it makes financial sense for us, I mean, if it's going to come out to $1 a parcel or less, and we're going to wind up spending more money, we can still opt out. So I think opting in and preserving, or for ourselves, or reserving the right to opt out later if things don't look, beneficial to the county makes good sense. So, motion?
I move that we opt in to the property tax relief program submitted by the governor via letter indicating that we reserve the right to opt out.
So that's the motion.
I second the motion. Aye.
Aye.
Aye, and the motion is carried to opt in and reserve the option to opt out on the governor's proposed property tax relief program. Thank you, everyone. Moving on. Item 4, employee bonus pool for fiscal year 20 discussion. Leslie?
So, I was kind of thinking, and I think there's other people who, I'd spoken to and kind of came up with this idea of a lot of times employee or departments have unspent funds that go back to the general fund at the end of the year. And I would like to look at some of those funds, a percentage of them, to potentially issue bonuses for FY20 based on some criteria of exceptional performers. And I have just some ideas here. But I didn't want to do a big program and spell out everything until I had at least one other commissioner who thought this was a good idea, and I wanted from the elected officials if they'd be willing to participate or not. I know I'm not being very clear, but like I said, I didn't want to put a whole bunch of guidelines down if there wasn't any interest. So I would, if the chairman agrees, open it up to elected officials and see if they feel like it was a benefit. And my idea being that in August, auditor would send out projections based on end of the year surplus, and that we would do it based on a percentage. So, you know, maybe 25% of the surplus would then be allocated among elected officials to give employee bonuses. So it's not going to be a one-for-one, you know, this elected official returned this much money, so they get 25% of that. I want to make it more of a bonus pool, because I know that there's a lot of elected officials that just come right in under the wire. And I want to respect that and give them opportunity to also give bonuses to their exceptional performers, because this has been one heck of a year. And I'm just ready to put up my tree, open presents, and start 21. So, yeah.
Okay. Any thoughts? No. Yeah, Ben, please. Sheriff Wolfinger.
This is probably more for Dena. And by the way, Steve, you are tall, just so you know. You know, in the past, there's been a certain expectation in the auditor's office to take that money that comes back. We've saved money through, you know, whatever, not filling positions or whatever, and rolling that into the next year's budget. And I don't know if would have a negative impact on what we're looking at for next year's budget. So it's really a Dena question.
Mm-hmm.
Come forward, Dena.
So at the end of the year, we roll forward our capital that's unspent. So we have, by statute, if we have ongoing projects, capital projects, and they're not done, and we have money left, we would roll that into the next budget year. As far as personnel goes, just spent personnel, that goes back to whatever fund it's in, be it the general fund, justice fund, whatever, B budget, same kind of way. So the only thing that would really roll forward would be the capital, but if the money is unspent, it does go back into fund balance.
Right, so my idea would be A and B, not C budgets, because we have too many projects that will be.
And those would already be moved and
That's right.
reallocated.
Correct. So yeah, my idea was just savings in A budgets and B budgets.
Any other?
Oh, that makes sense. Bill, do you have any, I'm sorry. Bill, do you have any thoughts?
Thoughts on this? Yeah, I do. Because we really don't have any standardized unified performance standards, I find it very difficult and arbitrary to start handing out bonuses. So I'm not in favor of the plan until we have those established.
Okay, so I'll speak to that. Some of my exceptional performers defined as follows: exceeds expectations due to high quality of work, made an exceptional or unique contribution in support of department, performance that significantly adds to the effectiveness of Kootenai County. And I know particular that there's at least one elected official here who, when they give out bonus, they can absolutely articulate that. And I think that would be important to be able to just say that. And then I would say that we would schedule an HR meeting early in September for BOCC approval, since that's what we have to do with every bonus, everything that involves compensation.
Barry, do you want to jump in here?
Thank you. Barry McHugh for the record. What I'm getting, if I understand it correctly, is an invitation or a request that we weigh in on whether we would participate in a discussion.
Yes.
And I think I am certainly willing to do that. I mean, I think how much money and how it would be allocated, or if at all, I think is what we're being asked to consider, and I would definitely participate in that discussion, not knowing how I would come down ultimately on bonuses or no bonuses. Thank you.
As the details roll out. Sylvia, Do you have any thoughts? I'm inviting our HR director, Sylvia, to jump in here.
Our policy does allow for bonuses to be awarded with approval from the Board of County Commissioners. I think if we do it in a consistent manner, that's fair and objective, and that we can defend if someone wasn't going to receive a bonus, that they had documented performance issues, that we can justify that. And I think we could pull legal in to work through all of those kind of issues. But, I mean, if the elected officials are willing to do it and we can find the funds, I think it's a great incentive for our employees to say, we appreciate what you've done for us. And they've taken on a lot with this COVID and continued to maintain essential services for our county.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? I think the idea actually has merit. What's interesting, as Leslie read off the criteria, I think it makes good sense because as a board, and I can't speak for all the other EO organizations, but as a board, we made a decision. Now, this is going back, I should say, to the prior board that I was part of, and after legal counsel, that we would do away with formal reviews. And one of the reasons we did that is because of the potential liability that's presented, especially with employee lawsuits being as rampant as they are. A specific case or example would be, here comes a, shall we say, above average performer, something goes wrong, we're forced, or someone, the responsible manager is forced to terminate. So what happens when that goes to court? Anyway, so I'll just leave that with you. And as a result of situations such as that, we said, you know what, we better watch it here and do away with formal reviews. But I like what Leslie's proposing, because what she's saying is, okay, we're at the end of the fiscal year here. We don't have formal performance evals, or at least we don't within the BOCC. And so here's a chance to at least recognize on some general set of criteria people that have done well. I'm fine. And we could discuss it further and iron out the details, but I'm fine.
Yeah, well, I was thinking of submitting some written comment, or not written comments, but written guidelines for EO approval. And so I can do that via email, and everybody can decide that they like it, or they have suggestions, add this, take away that kind of thing. So I just wanted to start the discussion here and know that mid-August, we probably will have some decent numbers to move forward in.
Okay. Anyone else? Bill, any final thoughts? Oh,
Okay, so Sheriff's happy to be part of it.
Just happy to be part of the discussion.
oh, okay. So noted. Thank you, Ben. Bill?
Yeah, I just find that basically evaluations for bonus purposes only at a specific time of the year are really overly simplistic, and I am not in favor of them.
Okay, fair enough. Anything else? Hearing none, I guess we've been in public comment, but I'll formally call for it. Hearing no public comment, time is 9:50. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone, very, very much. Thank you, Jill Daugherty of Eide Bailey. Appreciate it.